Okay, welcome everyone to another week of discussion of the weekly Haftara. And I'm excited to say that finally, we have a Haftara that we can sink our teeth into. Meaning, it's not particularly difficult in terms of its themes. It's not particularly difficult in terms of its words. It's a Navi, a prophet who we know, Yechezkel. Maybe he's not the main Navi, but he's not a minor Navi. It's Perek Lamed Zayin in Yechezkel. And maybe more than that is the tie-in to our parsha is so obvious as to not really need much in the way of explanation. Our parsha begins with the heated conflict between Yehuda and Yosef, right? Vayigash elav Yehuda vayomer bi Adoni yedabana avdecha dava baznei Adoni vayichar abcha ba'avdecha ki chamocha kefaro vayichar abcha ba'avdecha. It's like in English when you say no offense attended, and then you should pay attention because the person's going to offend the other person if you're listening to the conversation. So when he says vayichar abcha ba'avdecha, I often think it means no offense intended. I'm about to insult you. And he does, and it's a difficult conversation. And no big surprise, our Haftara begins with the psukim, Va'atav ben Adam, kach lecha eitz echad, uchtov alav lihuda v'livnei Yisrael chaveirav. Right, take one piece of wood, one tree, and write lihuda v'livnei Yisrael chaveirav. Ulekach eitz echad, and take another piece of wood, another tree. Uksov alav li Yosef eitz Ephraim v'chol beis Yisrael chaveirav, and write, if eitz Ephraim v'chol Yisrael chaveirav, v'karav otam echad el echad l'chol le'eitz echad, vayula achadim biyadecha. Right? So how exactly they're going to become one? Are they going to be stapled? Are they going to be nailed? Are they going to be grafted? Okay, we could discuss that. But l'maisa, you're taking the split in the Jewish people, the split between Yosef, who's more or less known in history as Ephraim, right? Yisimchalim k'Ephraim b'chim Menashe v'yosam es Ephraim b'fnei Menashe. Ephraim, the younger son, gets the name of Yosef and is thought of as the continuation of Yosef. And so when the Navi says, I'm going to take two separate pieces of wood, one which is identified with Yehuda, and one which is identified with Yosef, and I'm going to make them one. So obviously the theme of our Haftarah is unity, right? Unity within Jewish people, unity among the Jewish people. It's what it is. And, it's so obvious, and I'll say this again, I hope, it's such a beautiful Haftarah. It's not just beautiful, it's spectacular. Like when you read the Haftarah, you get inspired by what's going to happen, what's going to come, by the prophecy. Okay? So, if it's so straightforward, what are we going to talk about? So the answer is, we'll try to highlight some of the main themes from the Haftarah. And to do that, let's start with the next pasuk. I read you not the first pasuk, that's just the introduction, but I read you the second and third. It's really the fourth pasuk that raises a question for us. Says the Navi, V'cha'asher yomru eilecha b'nei amcha lemor, halo tagid lanu ma'ela lach. So what's the question, ma'ela lach? People didn't understand the metaphor. They didn't understand that you're taking two pieces and binding them together in some way to make them one. They don't understand the unity of the Jewish people. It seems so straightforward. What's the question? So here we have to back up for a second and ask ourselves for some context in terms of Sefer Yechezkel. So as an overview, the first 24 prakim of Sefer Yechezkel are full of nevuos about Churban Beis Hamikdash. It's pretty down, I would say. And then come a bunch of prakim that are not about the Churban Beis Hamikdash, but they're about the negative nevuos about the surrounding nations, about Mitzrayim and Tzor and Sidon and Ammon and Moab, and how they were happy or they were going to be happy about the Churban, and therefore God's going to destroy them. Okay, that's the punishment. And then there's a sudden change. And from Perek Lamed Zayin, our Perek, until the end of the Sefer, it's all very upbeat. It's all about the Geula. It's all about the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash, our return to Yerushalayim, and it begins in our Perek. But our Haftarah starts only in the middle of our Perek. The beginning of our Perek is the Nevuah of the Atzamot HaYeveshot that we read Pesach time as the Haftarah. And, we know that Haftarah, right? There's all these scattered bones, and Yechezkel brings them back to life, and they rejoin the Jewish people, and that's also inspiring, and that's also wonderful. But it's fair to ask, whose bones are they? As the introduction to our Haftarah, so whose bones are they? And the feeling of Mefarshim is that the 10 tribes, who Ephraim is usually associated with, right? They were sent into Galut, or they went into Galut, about 150 years before Churban Beis HaMikdash. Okay? And the truth is, we don't give a lot of thought to them because we don't know any of them. And Jews who lived at the time of Yechezkel didn't know any of them. And so why should we feel their loss? So perhaps when Bnei Yisrael say Ma'elelach, it's not because they don't understand the metaphor. Of course they understand the metaphor, and they understand what unity is. But they're saying, do we really need the 10 lost tribes? Is that necessary for the unity of the Jewish people? Right? They don't agree with the Nevuah. It's been so long since Yehuda and Yosef were unified, right? Do we really need it? Won't the redemption of Yehuda be sufficient? Did anybody think in 1948, well, what about the 10 tribes? No, we were thrilled that we got Eretz Yisrael back. We were thrilled that we got our own state, right? Plenty of empires over time split up, and, there's no thought to putting them back together. So why is it necessary now for the 10 tribes who were exiled and really lost to Jewish history, to all history, why do they have to come back? And the truth is, even when the Aseret HaShvatim existed, there was huge tension and huge jealousy and huge competition between the Shvatim. Right? For most of our history, when they existed, there was Malchut Yehuda, which consisted of Yehuda, Binyamin, most of Shevet Levi and some scattered other Shvatim, and Malchut Yisrael, which were and identified with the 10 tribes. So the people are saying to Yechezkel, hey, maybe that's not how it's supposed to be. Maybe Yehuda, Binyamin, what we have left, is who we're supposed to be. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no, that's not the case. The time will come, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when we're going to be one people, not just religiously, but politically. Says the Navi, and again, it's such a beautiful Haftarah, I urge everybody to read it inside. V'daber aleihem, ka'amar Adonai Elohim, hine ani lokech et b'nei Yisrael mibein hagoyim, asher holchu sham, v'kibatzti otam misaviv, v'heveti otam al admatam. Says God, I'm going to return the Jewish people to their land. Va'asita otam l'goy echad ba'aretz b'harei Yisrael, u'melech echad yeh l'kulam l'melech, v'lo yihiyu od lishnei goyim, v'lo yechatzu od lishtei mamlachot od. No more divisions, no more separation. Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm going to bring them back to the land, and they're going to be one people. And it's worth asking ourselves right now, today, right, which side of this issue we're on. Meaning, do we feel the absence of the Aseret HaShvatim? Right? How many of us get excited when we hear something on the news about some African tribe that associates itself with Shevet Naphtali or Shevet Dan? Right? Do we feel like a part of ourselves is missing and we need these people to come back? Or do we just think, let sleeping dogs lie? Fine, they've been gone for thousands of years. Okay, so they're gone. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu thinks otherwise. HaKadosh Baruch Hu thinks that for us eventually in the Geula that's going to come, you need a real kibbutz galios. And a real kibbutz galios is not just limited to us, to the Jews who we know today. It's going to include the Shvatim that have been lost to the Jewish people and lost to themselves. And the Gemara makes clear that according to at least one Shita, they're not Jews anymore. There's no reason to think that they're Jews anymore. And so maybe the answer is, okay, they're gone. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu thinks otherwise. HaKadosh Baruch Hu thinks that they need to come back. It's important for them to come back. And we need to make ourselves sensitive to that. It's not something that we're normally sensitive to. The idea of coming back, it means I know this person, and they're going to come back, and I'm excited to meet them. But when I don't know the person, so what's the point of them coming back? And says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, no, you're supposed to want this because it's what I want to happen. And the truth is, when you go back to our Parsha, the reconciliation of Yosef and his brothers doesn't just happen immediately. It took a long, long time, and it's hard to know whether it's ever really resolved, right? But if you look at the end of Parshas Vayechi, so after Yaakov dies, and I remind you that's 17 full years after the story in this week's Parsha, after Miketz, Vayitzavu el Yosef lemor, Avicha tziva lifnei moto lemor, right? They told Yosef, this is what your father said before he died. It's a lie, says Ramban. Yaakov never said this. Ko tamru Yosef, ana sana fesha achecha v'chatatam kira ogmalucha. Please, forgive your brothers who did evil to you. V'ata sana lefesha avdei Elohei avicha v'yefki Yosef b'dabra, my love. And then it gets worse. V'yelchu gam echa v'yiplu l'fanav v'yamru hinenu lecha la'avadim. In my worst moments with my brothers, I never thought to offer myself up as a slave, right? This is not a healthy relationship. It's difficult. And say the brothers, rather than have Yosef kill us, rather than Yosef cut us off, right? We need to beg him to let us survive, to be his slaves, okay? It takes a long time, if at all, for the tension to be resolved. And living with some tension among and between the Shvatim may be unpleasant, but it may serve a purpose. And what I'm going to say now may sound sacrilegious to you, but give it a second. I think it makes some sense. I think the founders of the United States were aware of this issue. That's the example I thought of. It was important for them to give most of the rights to the states, right? If I'm Massachusetts, if I'm North Carolina, I care very much about my ability to maintain a separate identity and a separate uniqueness, but to still build a unified country, right? We call it in law states' rights versus federal rights. The Supreme Court, federal courts, cannot rule on something unless it impacts a conflict between the states. Now, some of that meaning has been lost over time, and for reasons that are necessary, right? New York doesn't have to be that unique anymore. Massachusetts doesn't have to be that unique anymore. But sometimes it is halacha l'maisa. With the president of the United States, as he currently is, sometimes states say, no, you have no authority on that issue. The issue is a state's issue. It's not a federal issue. And therefore, even though you're the president of the United States, it's not an issue. But of course, Am Yisrael is not just a political entity, it's a religious entity as well, which is why it's really important to point out that religion only comes at the end of our Haftara. It only comes after the political. Says Yechezkel, V'lo yitamu od bigiluleihem uvishikutzehem uvechol pishehem v'hoshati otam mikol moshvotehem asher chatu vahem v'tiharti otam v'hayu li la'am v'ani eheyeh lohem le'elohim. No, I'm going to be their God. I'm the only God. V'avdi David melech aleihem v'oreh echad yeh lekulam uv'mishpatah yelechu v'chukotah yishmeru v'asu otam. They're going to all be from in the end. They're going to bow down and be subservient to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. the idea that political redemption comes before religious redemption is a pretty significant point in our modern history, right? We know it's a fact, more or less, that the modern state of Israel was established by Chilonim. But we don't think that invalidates the modern state of Israel. We're moving towards a goal. And the goal isn't just political unity, the goal is religious unity. But until that time comes and people realize it's not just Chilonim will realize it, Gentiles will realize it as well. Says the Navi, V'yadu hagoyim ki ani Adonai mikadesh et Yisrael b'yot mikdashi b'tocham le'olam. Right? There's going to be a Beit HaMikdash again. And it's going to be the center of our religious and our political universe. And we're going to worship HaKadosh Baruch Hu there. That's the goal. And while we're at it, I'll just add one postscript. The concept of unity. Everybody wants unity. And if you ask me what is unity, I will tell you, well, when the time comes, I'm going to make a speech, and it's going to be really, really convincing, and everybody's going to agree with me, and then we'll have unity. So even if I dream that, and I sometimes do, right, that's not how it works. It can't be that way. The idea of unity involves compromise. And I think that's what Yechezkel is saying. Yechezkel could have written Yehuda and Ephraim on the same piece of wood, but doesn't do that. He's not saying everybody needs to be the same. He's not saying we have to agree on everything. That's not the point. The point is we can disagree on certain things if we agree on the main things, and that will serve as the unity, as the grafting of the tree of Yosef, of the tree of Ephraim, and the tree of Yehuda together. How do we do this? Well, we have to agree on a goal, and we have to agree on what we can compromise on, right? And then we can move forward. Presumably, we need to build a land and a people and a polity of Avodat Hashem. They recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they recognize the Mikdash, they recognize that Avodas Hashem is foundational to who we are as a people. Yeah, that seems non-negotiable. Similarly, we can't allow any immorality in our land. Now, we can all decide and we can all discuss, and we can argue about what's immorality. But these have to be the goals. And it's up to us. If we can build a society that's God-focused, and if we can build a society with the Beit HaMikdash as the center of our religious world, then we'll be zocha to what Yechezkel says at the end of the Haftara. V'yadu hagoyim ki ani Adonai mikadesh et Yisrael b'yot mikdashi b'tocham le'olam. When the world sees us this way, then we'll know that we're really, truly on the way to the ultimate Geula. Shabbat Shalom.